Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Permanent Wealth Podcast. This is Adrian Johnson in the chair today asking the questions because on this episode, we have a guest, your usual host, sitting in the other chair. And of course, I'm talking about financial planner, investor, husband and father, and now author, Adam Walkom, who is the guest on today's podcast. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Adrian. It's very nice to be on this side of the microphone, albeit the same microphone.
The same
But
microphone. Yes.
same
Well,
microphone, but nice to be a guest. I've done a couple of other guest podcasts, but it's good fun. But
so
glad to be here.
yes. So today we are talking about Plan for Happy. Plan for Happy is your first soiree into authorship. Well, in a formal sense, we do lots of authoring of blog posts and reports and things for clients all the time, but this is for the general public at large. So Plan for Happy, wonderful title. Readers picking that up, probably expecting a nice light story to kick things off, but that's not actually how it starts, is it? There's a bit of starts with a very Australian vernacular and away we go. So do you want to just talk me through the genesis of the book?
Sure. So, the book is effectively the culmination of, call it 25 years of thinking and writing and investing and understanding both financial markets and personal finance. It's also a reflection of my kind of progress and almost call it family progress around going through what you would not call a linear progress in terms of financial history. And so there's been plenty of ups and downs along the way. And so I've been a financial planner for coming up to, it's just over 10 years now. And then previously was an investor and a trader and doing derivative sales before that. But over those years and helping clients, especially for the last 10 years, there's been a lot of work around helping clients understand what personal investing is about. And really, there's the idea, and I talk about it in the book a little bit. Most people, when they think about financial planning, they think, oh, it's about pensions and investments and things like that. But actually, it's not about that. That's the output. It's actually it's far more deeper in terms of our own personal psychology, our own goals and deep held beliefs and life goals and hopes for our children. And all these things come into factors of actually not only how we spend our money today, but how we think about where we want to be in the future and what that looks like. And I think really a lot of really what we do, and as you know, because you sit in meetings with clients and you talk to clients about the financial planning. So much of what we do with the financial planning is really kind of helping clients understand and define for themselves their not just goals and objectives, because that just sounds, that's just such a nothing type word, but what do they really care about? Really, what do they see themselves? Where would they really like to be in 10 or 15 years time? Actually, what really would make them happy? All of these things, because the answer is so different for everybody. There's the concept of, for some people, happiness is driving a camper van around Europe and having a great time with their partner. That one's not for me. I can't stand camper vans, but there's nothing wrong with you if you want a camper van. For others, it might be like surfing safaris in Guatemala. For others, it might be flying on private jets and gambling in Monaco casinos. Everyone is slightly different. And when you start at that end point on terms of, okay, what's actually going to make us happy, then you've actually got something to aim for. And once you start moving back from there, it really kind of, the plan starts to come to fruition. You can kind of start putting, you've got that North Star there. And what that allows you is then you've got a skeleton in place, you start to put the pieces on the skeleton. And that's what we do with our clients. And it's really the principle of this is what I wanted to represent in this book was effectively the same. It's the same thing that we do with our clients. It's the same of trying to help people, give them that journey or that roadmap effectively to work their way through this so they can have the same experience that they would have if we work with them.
Right. So finance books often have certain types of people in mind. Some can be extremely technical, some can be, on the wishy-washy end. Obviously, being a professional writing this book, you will have a target audience in mind. Who you've sort of covered off on the concept of who it's for, but in terms of who you'd like to be reading this book, is it young people, old people? Is there some sort of target person you'd be interested in?
It's a good question, and I thought about that when writing it. And I mean, obviously, anyone can benefit from reading this book, but I really think it is more focused on the young person. And when I say the young person, typically nobody thinks about this stuff in their early 20s. They should, but they don't, because we're all too busy having fun, going out, all of that stuff, doing what we should be doing in our early 20s. I think I use an example in the book about when I was in my early 20s and working at a large bank. They offered me a 7%, had a 7% benefits package where you could either have your 7% paid into your pension or you could take it extra as cash. And now, as a 24-year-old living in London,
give me the money.
What do you think I did? It wasn't a hard choice. In hindsight, what should have I done? Because what have I got from that apart from less hair? So look, I think when I think of the perfect client to read this book, I think of, frankly, the people in their, let's say, late 20s, early 30s, just in the process of, frankly, in inverted commas, without sounding bad, growing up. The idea of, okay, when they're in starting a serious relationship, maybe they're married, maybe they've just had children, and it's like, okay, we've now got to learn, how to be adults here, because no one tells you how to be an adult, and frankly, sometimes you don't want to be an adult. But things like getting a will, it's the idea of, okay, this is actually when something becomes about more than you. And I think that's what a will is, kind of the first step. And most people generally, well, actually, too many people don't have a will, but when you get a will when you've had your first child, because you realize, actually, this is more than just about me. And that's, I think, about the same time when this book, that's about that same time for people to start their savings journey as well, and their planning journey around this. Now, to ask any 31-year-old to plan and tell me what exactly you're going to be doing when you're 65 and retired is, I mean, you could say it's pointless, but it's not pointless if you answer the question with the context of actually that, with the idea that answer probably will change over time. So you say, okay, my thoughts today are it's going to be like this, but having an understanding that actually answer is flexible and that answer can change over time. And frankly, the answer probably will change over time, because I can tell you a lot of what was important. I'm sure the same with everybody listening. A lot of what was really important to me at age 31, at age 46 right now, less so important. Absolutely. Going to a Chelsea game on a Saturday afternoon was really important to me when I was 31. Now, it's more driving children from choir lessons to ballet to football practice to all of those things. That's my Saturdays, and that's fine, and I love it. And but it's just different. And so, yeah.
So what I'm saying is that this book makes light relief from all the how to be a dad books and all.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my wife loves reading that stuff and encourages me, tells me, you should be reading more of this stuff and you should be reading more. And I'm like, yeah, I take it. It's fine. Now, but this is for someone who, speaking to financial planners is important because they give you the professional advice. For a lot of people, though, the idea of a financial planner is just a bridge too far, because they're not ready. They don't want to do it. They feel like it might cost too much. I think, there's the quote on the back of the book that everyone needs financial advice. They just haven't realized they need it yet. And so I think it's for those people who are just in those first stages of understanding and want to put something in place for themselves. Um, so yeah.
Good. So in turning to the book itself, there's a few bits I like to pick up on and just explore with you. You talk about the emotional context of money in one of the early chapters, setting the scene for the book in many respects. Money is a very emotional topic. I know I've had some dialogue recently with a lawyer I know about, families just not being able to talk about money, or when it's actually the most important thing they should be thinking about it from time to time. So help me go through how you've unpacked the emotional context of money for this book.
Well, I think the key part about that is actually what you've just talked about there, which is just establishing the connection in recognizing the connection of that actually money does have a significant inherent emotion tied up in it. That's excuse me, that's the most important part to start with, because if you can recognize that, you can then start to understand where some of this actions, or where some of the reasons for previous decision making have come from. And so, there is the idea of, the classic example is someone buying a Rolex watch. Why do you buy a Rolex watch versus owning a Swatch, for example? They both tell the time. Fact, what a watch is designed to do, watches are designed to tell the time. Does a Swatch tell the times just as well as a Rolex? Yes. For most people, that's it. Not for most people. For us, a number of people, that's it. Case closed. Why would I ever bother spending a ridiculous amount of money on a watch that all it does is tell the time? So that's one side of the argument, and I get that, and that's fine, and that's a very practical argument. For the other side of the argument, that Rolex doesn't just represent the time, it represents something else. It represents potentially a significant personal milestone that person has wanted to reward themselves with. It represents potentially someone who has had not a wealthy upbringing, but has come into wealth and wants to show there's that wealth as well. So there's many different aspects about what that spending represents. And that's not just buying watches, but it's going on holidays, it's driving cars, it's what houses you live in, it's what schools you send your children to. Whatever decision, there is so many. I mean, look, whether you buy a coffee, are you frugal just to do you buy, use an espresso machine, or do you go and buy that latte every day? That's a decision that you've made with other decisions going on behind us. And so it's just really helpful, especially in the part where I talk about creating savings plans and how to help people improve their saving. It's having an understanding about why we spend the way we spend. And if we can help unpack that, we don't necessarily, I'm not saying you must change course in terms of your spending. It's just having an understanding that helps then drive the decision making going forward. And there was a question previously on another podcast I did, and they talked about, oh yeah, this sounds great. Here's a magic book that's going to make everyone happy and millionaires and do everything like that. And it's like, well, but yet still be able to spend all the money they want to spend. Is this magical fairyland? How does that work? And I said, well, clearly it doesn't. That's a total misreading of what it actually is. But the context of, if you're out there spending money every day, that's without necessarily having a long-term goal in mind, then you will just continue to spend that money. However, you can still go and spend that money every day. But if you've got a long-term goal in your mind that says, okay, I actually do want to go and achieve something, I want to go and retire on a beach in wherever when I'm 65, and I put a plan in place to get me there. And the plan's sustainable. The plan is there. So, and that plan requires me to do things today and me to save money this month and next month and the month after to get me to that plan. And actually changing, because you've got that plan in place and you've got that long-term view in mind, changing the spending habits therefore becomes a lot easier, because you've got an offset. You're not just doing it for the sake of, because I should be good. There is it almost kind of goes back to kind of the biological argument in what's going on in your brain. Most people get a dopamine hit from spending money or doing whatever, but if you can create a situation where you get a dopamine hit from not spending money and a dopamine hit from saving money because you're getting that little 1 inch closer to achieving that long-term goal, that's a fantastic scenario. And that's the scenario I'm trying to help people create for themselves through the book.
Right. So it's really, I was thinking as you were explaining that about being conscious, or being in, people talk about being intentional, or being, being thoughtful about what you're doing, rather than being caught up in consumerism. And, there's plenty of money thrown at marketing to make us buy things we don't really want or need, or there's a lot of discussion around that in the times we live in. But as you say, I think there you're setting out a goal and a plan which enables you to be more intentional about your spending.
Yeah.
And it underpins that, rather than it just being some idea that you picked up and therefore you can't sustain.
And it's the concept of, also I talk about in the book, of the idea of it's a very binary choice in a lot of ways. It's either taking active decisions or letting things drift. And there is those two. It is effectively a binary choice around that.
Yeah.
You either let things drift and let the cards, are dealt, and they lie where they lie. And inherently, because of, as you described, all these other pressures, marketing companies, social media companies out there spending billions with the idea of hacking your brain to get you to spend money in a certain way. If someone has no barrier against that, we've got no chance. You don't have a chance. These companies are designed, it's the classic, it's why McDonald's tastes like McDonald's does, because they've got chemists there who design it to create a certain way to get you to eat more or whatever. Versus the shield you have from that is the active decision making. And so it's trying to help people create that shield against, marketing companies, social media companies, anything that's trying to get them to spend money in a way that's probably not the best for them, and help them take not only that, but then help them therefore follow their own path, but it's an act that they have actively chosen themselves.
Right. Well, talking about paths, let's talk about the book has a wonderful schematic, which a blueprint, which is flows through the theme of the book. So let's start with one of the main sections of that, which is planning, and talk about the process of planning and the importance and why that comes first, perhaps, rather than other areas of finances.
Sure. They're all. We've got planning. The three main areas are planning, saving, and investing, and they're all linked. But planning is the one at the top, because ultimately you can't, like I kind of said before, you can't save for something that you don't know what it is. There's no point just saving money into an account and watch the value of the account go up if you don't know what you're going to use that account for, because it just makes it much harder to do. And then investing is exactly the same. There's no point in having an investment plan if you don't know what you're investing for, and most importantly, what time frame you're investing over. So that's why we start with planning. And planning really kind of unpacks a little bit more about what I described before, in terms of establishing that kind of skeleton frame that we can start to put things on. And that frame starts at that big picture long-term goal, and then works backwards along the way with individual like other points of sort of like kind of shorter term goals, medium term goals that you can put onto that plan, that also helps drive the different decisions along the way. So I'll use an example. So if we talked about someone who's saying, look, I want to retire when I'm 65, and they're currently 40. So that's 25 years time. Great. And also, by the way, there's a whole different section and chapter on actually what is retirement, because retirement is not getting a gold watch and playing golf for the rest of your life. That does not exist anymore. So what is retirement is a whole different question, but we can talk about that later. But all right, but taking back a step. So just because you want to go and you've got this idea of where you want to be at 65, and you're 40 today, you still got 25 years to get there, and 25 years are probably your most productive life. And in that point, you may have children, you may move house, you have a career, all of these things, which frankly cost money. And so you've got to have the money to spend on those things. You can't put every penny away for this long-term goal. So the planning element is kind of, so it's not only thinking the long term, but looking back at these other events that are going to happen on that process, and making sure that generally your things are set up, or your financial situation is set up in a way that you can afford to do the things you want to do, but at the same time having a realistic understanding that, okay, if you've got, I don't know, £5,000 coming in to the household each month, what do you need to live? And therefore, what else can you put away? And if you put away a certain amount, is that going to be enough for you for that long-term goal? And if it's not, then either you need to put away more, or you need to change that goal. And so it makes it a lot simpler in that sense. And I also just want to expand on one thing around thinking about the planning. And this is actually a little bit of a reaction to, you've heard of the FIRE, sort of the people,
Yes.
the FIRE generation.
Financial independence, retire early. Yeah.
Financial independence, retire early. And you've got, I mean, there's this is a whole like social media, like rabbit hole of people who go and say, I'm going to retire at 35 because I'm saving every single penny in my mid-20s, and, you know, I'm going to do whatever I do, and I'm going to be free, in inverted commas. To put it out there, I think that's a terrible idea. I think there's so many things wrong with that idea. You are totally giving up, effectively, you're stopping spending in your, you know, you're only ever going to be 25, 26, 27 in your 20s and 30s once. And I tell you, from someone who's 46, I'm a lot, you know, it's a lot harder to get up in the morning, things creak, etc. at 46, let alone what it's like at 56 or 66. So the idea of, you know, stopping living in a lot of ways during that time, I don't know. I just don't see, I think that's dangerous, and I don't think it's the best thing for you. Also, the idea of being free, okay, financial independence, I can kind of get, but as long as you've got something to do with it, I mean, what are you going to do when you're retired? If you're retired at 35, what actually do you do? Because for so many people, their work or their identity is made up in terms of, your identity is who I am and what I do. And so it's the what I do part is actually really important. So, sorry, it was just something I thought of there, but I digress slightly. But the idea of having the plan, having a long-term plan in place, and ultimately just working towards that, then starts to fill out everything else.
Right. So I often sort of end up sort of talking about that in terms of a conversation between your present self and your future self. Gets a few eyebrows raised when I talk about that in meetings with people, but in a sense, it's finding the balance. The FIRE movement you've mentioned is all about everything accrues to the future self, and the present self is totally deprived. When you think of it through the lens that you have, and then the alternative is consumerism at the expense of all, you know, not being able to pay the bills next week. And so they're the extremities.
Yeah,
and it sounds like if we're planning for happiness is the happy, they call it the happy medium for a reason. It's the path in between. But having some guidance, having a plan allows you to be happy along the way, knowing you're still going to get to where you need to get to. It takes the uncertainty out of the future, I guess, is what you're saying.
That's a great description, and that's exactly right. And I never actually thought of that analogy in terms of the extremes, both ends. But you're spot on. Maybe you should be a financial planner. So yeah, no, but I think the most important part of that is that where you said the happy medium in between, but it's also there's some intention there. There's some active decision making that allows you kind of to sit comfortably and have the knowledge and awareness and transparency in your own situation to sit comfortably. Okay, I could go and spend more every month, but then I wouldn't have enough to put away. Or I could subjugate myself and, you know, just never buy a store-bought latte ever, and then, but is that actually, and then just, what happens if something happens to me in 5 years time and, it never happens. So you're not enjoying that time at the moment. So yeah, but the planning part is, yes, absolutely the key first step.
Right. So this is a 3-part process, and the next two, in some sense, feel very closely linked. And you've talked about saving and investing. So perhaps let's unpack saving a bit first. How have you approached that in the book?
So the savings part is, I guess the savings part is a little bit different than what we would normally do with our clients. Most of our clients are generally in the process of, probably a little bit older than I would say that where this book is maybe pitched for. So in terms of how to help them come up with their own savings plans, we can certainly do it, but we don't really spell it out as in much detail as I do in the book. So the savings plan is really kind of coming up with ideas and a strategy, frankly, to help people, understand or help people put a plan into place. So it's, again, becoming intentional, taking active decisions, and effectively creating a structure, and hopefully a pretty easy structure, that allows them to save what they want to save, but also then still spend where they want to spend. So in that sense, you've got, I think I talked about it earlier, but one of the key points around the savings plan is creating the safety net. Because we've all, had many kind of experiences of, you have the best laid plans, but then something random happens and all of a sudden you need the cash and bam, there goes, you got to start from square one again. But one of the most important aspects in terms of how we put a plan together is getting clients and getting anyone to help to put a safety net in place. And this is where it's like, okay, if the boiler goes kaput, what do you need? If you need to travel overseas on an emergency, how much are you going to need? All of these things that if you can just have a stash of, could be 5,000, could be 10,000, could be 20,000, whatever you feel comfortable with, just sitting in a cash account, doesn't need to be doing anything, just sitting there in place, really then allows the rest of the plan to continue not touched. So that's the most important part. And then the rest of the idea on the savings is just kind of helping people putting that structure in place to say, okay, but also labeling the buckets, saying, what are you saving for? Okay, this pot here is my flat deposit fund, or this pot here is my school fees fund. Because again, that gives you, to try to kind of help rewire your brain a little bit here, to help when you've got intention around, okay, I'm not just saving to a random savings pot that I'm getting 4% or 3% or whatever. I'm actually putting money, every penny I put into this pot is another penny I'm putting towards my flat deposit or putting towards the school fees. That helps the brain. That helps our motivation of again, making the savings plan easier. And so we talk about that. I also then talk about a few other things to help savings, to help the amount of how much we can save, because ultimately, what we can save, our net, is down to our surplus, which is our income minus our expenditure. And so if we can increase that surplus through either increasing income or decreasing expenditure, that's good. And especially decreasing expenditure in a way that is that actually we don't notice. So an example I do quite often, and I know you do it, and I try and do it, is once every 6 months we do a direct debit audit. And so just looking at bank account or subscription models designed by software companies or whoever are really, really profitable. And there's a reason, because they're really, really profitable, because we just forget about them. You just don't know that you don't see them coming out every month. So it's having a look at actually your bank statements once every 6 months and looking through all the direct debits and go, do I really need this? Do I really need Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, Paramount, whatever? On
the TV ones, exactly. Because we cancel them religiously and then just every now and then you start one up again. We've just done Disney for December, basically.
Yeah, and that's a great way to do it,
Binge
because
it and then we'll turn it off again.
yeah, exactly. And it's a great way to do it, because you can always, you can always start them again. There's nothing wrong with turning them off and starting them again. B, funnily enough, a lot of these things, if you go to turn them off, they'll throw discounts at you anyway. It is also something to consider if you really want to keep with them. But ultimately, it is a better experience normally to turn it off. Okay, have I really, really missed it? Yeah, if I've missed it, all right, turn it back on again. It's fine. And so it's helping people try and do that sort of thing as well. And I do talk about, I remember getting good advice in terms of getting a raise. How do I get a raise? And I remember when I was a management consultant, one of my managers, purposely had this thing where he said, right, every day I spend the last half an hour of my day, every day, working towards on something that has nothing to do with my day-to-day work, because it's something that I know is important to my manager or whoever, because I want to get a promotion or I want to get a raise. And you know what? It works. You solve your boss's problem, your boss is going to be pretty pleased with you.
That doesn't sound like a McKinsey person at all doing something like that.
But it's just kind of like, I don't know, have we forgotten about that in terms of whether, I don't know, in terms of, look, and I'm not 25.
Being intentional, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 35. I'm not, I run a company. I'm not looking for, I don't need anyone to give me a raise. What I do need to do is help clients. And providing value to my clients. And how do you provide value to clients? Well, you go outside of the normal, what's expected, because what's expected is what's expected, but you're not providing value at that point. Your value is actually what's not expected. And that's classified across anyone in a service industry, waitresses, waiters, whoever, you provide anything outside the normal expectation, your clients, whoever those is paying the bills, really pleased with that, frankly, it becomes financially positive. It's a financially positive transaction for you as the person doing it. So, there's just a couple of those sort of ideas in there as well, which ultimately is about A, putting a structure in place, but B, increasing the input, i.e. the surplus, into that structure.
Yeah. So saving, most people probably have a concept of saving in their mind. We've all had a savings account at some stage in a bank, or some of us have been lucky to have a paycheck that didn't all get eaten up on the bills for a month and you had a little bit spare. Not so easy these days. But the bit where I think people sometimes struggle more with financial planning is the investing. So saving sort of, yes, intuitively we can sort of see it. It feels more doable. And as you say, there's lots of little tactics around of how to save and to save more. Investing's not the same thing. Investing's all of a sudden that black box over there with these people who talk in funny, speak in tongues and come up with all sorts of things. And I'm scared, or I'm wary, or I'm concerned I might do the wrong thing. So let's try and I know, as a firm, Permanent Wealth Partners has a big focus on demystifying that for clients, but this book as well spends quite a bit of time talking about what investing really is. So, and I know this is one of your favorite topics, so I'll let you run a little bit on this one, but help us unpack investing as a concept for readers and for listeners.
So for most people, let's again, it's a little probably harder for you and I and anyone who's worked in financial markets to understand about, so let's call it the general public's view of investing, because we've been involved. I've been involved in it my whole life. In fact, I tell the story. My grandmother first bought me shares when I was 11 years old. And those shares were in McMahon Holdings, which is a small Australian engineering company. And every day I used to open the paper and look at what McMahon Holdings did on a, up or down. And then, and it went from there. And I think, frankly, I've checked stock prices every day since, which you will know. So look, what most people's view of investments are, the only time they ever see investment are when markets fall and it hits the 10 p.m. news and they flash to a picture of a balding guy running his hands through his hair, or receding hairline, looking worried. That's the perfect. Next time watch out for that. If anyone's listening, next time there's a market crash segment, they will always show the picture of it. If it's always a balding guy running his hands through his hair, and that's just basically that's the fear.
Bad. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fear. Oh, markets crash, fear. And that's all they know, because that's what hits the 10 p.m. news. But markets going up by 1.5% every day, doesn't hit the news. So that's where, frankly, that's the starting point we come from. Investing is scary. There's risk. You lose money. And in a lot of ways, our regulator has helped, to try and demystify that. But a lot of ways, our regulator hasn't helped in terms of trying to create this sort of safety for all mentality, which ends up not helping individuals, because it means it's much harder for us to advise on an individual basis. Now, clearly we do, but it's not as easy. And from a general public's perspective, investing is, I think I put it there, the only way, frankly, to grow wealth is through equity. It's through owning a business or a proportion of a business. So you could be owning your own business on one hand of the extreme. On the other end of the extreme, it's owning one share of Amazon, one share of Apple, one share of Google, one share of BP, whatever. Because ultimately, businesses should be, if a business is not accreting, growing in value, the business will die. So owning that equity and owning the piece of, in a capitalist societies 1 + 1 can equal 3, whereas on a socialist society 1 + 1 = 2, and probably sometimes even less than that, because you've got to discount for the people scraping stuff off the top in there, whatever. That's more of a political comment. But in the capitalist society, 1 + 1 = 3, because the idea that you can companies create value, and they create value for their shareholders, they create value for their consumers, and they create value for themselves. And you represent, as a shareholder, you participate in that value. And so, but that value comes with risk. Like, yes, it does. The value of shares can go up and the value of shares can go down. The good news around that is the value of the shares historically goes up way more than anything else. Any other asset class you can pick, the value of listed shares goes up significantly more. But it's got to be, that shares in plural, it's not individual companies, and there's a big difference between those. B, you've got to give it long enough time horizon to do that, because at some point it will, at many points in fact, it will fall in value, and that's fine. That's kind of part of the system. We expect that to fall. And so the understanding of having that as our base understanding, that really the only way to increase our wealth is by owning equity in some way, shape or form. And B, if we can we can give that equity long enough and not interrupt it at the wrong times, i.e. sell when the markets are falling, then that's our best chance we have of creating true wealth. And so it's understanding and getting really kind of what the book does, and what we do with our clients is trying to help people understand that element around investing. And once you've got a base understand of that element, you can kind of work backwards from there to say, okay, so we know we need a proportion of the funds to grow for the long term, because let's go back to the plan. Let's think about the long-term retirement plan. Let's say the 25-year example. Okay, we need a proportion of that money that's going to be growing over the 25-year period. Fine. Let's allocate that. And so for a lot of people, we do this through their pensions, because for most people, pensions are going to be their longest dated asset class. And so that's just the way that we do it. Other people do it slightly differently. So we have that side. Then when we go back to, you could hopefully starting to see the links when I talked about these sort of medium term things like the flat fund, or, flat deposit, and the school fees fund, these medium term and shorter term goals. We also then have their goals that we can save towards as well, and we can use investments to help us achieve those particular goals. But with those, because the time horizon's different and shorter, we need to be a little more careful around the ups and downs of the path that we're going to get. because as we know, markets always have ups and downs, and anyone who's invested and I'm sure looked at your pension anytime, you know that we have ups and downs. And these ups and downs take years to go through. We've just been through a down, which has taken a good couple of years to work our way through. We're just feeling like we're coming out the other side of it, which is good news. But for those who invested in late 2021 or put some money to work, it's been painful. They've been looking at negative numbers. But that's what the markets do. That's fine. Having an understanding of that is the most important aspect. So back to the medium term and the shorter term. So the way we think about that is, okay, we've got an investment plan in place for these type of goals. So for those goals, what is more important? We're not going to go for the growth for just pure 100% growth for those, because if we get to 2 or 3 or 1 year out from our, where we're going to need the money to put down for the flat deposit, and markets fall 40%, that means the flat deposit drops 40%. That's not good. No one wants that. So we design those investments a bit differently. So we use things like bonds. We use things like gold. We use things like cash. We use other different asset classes that behave in a slightly different way than shares. And so the idea of that creates a bit more diversification. Diversification has the good thing about diversification. It reduces the noise in terms of the up and downs over time. The bad thing about diversification is it does reduce the overall growth rate over a long period of time. And so there's an offset to that. And so it's just, as long as we've got an understanding of that, that's okay. But, as we can still set it up to achieve those particular goals. So you can kind of see where I'm going here in terms of, we're using the plan. We've got the investment strategy from the plan. We have having an understanding on how markets work and how wealth is created through equities. And then we're using different asset classes in different areas to achieve slightly different goals. And then we kind of get to all of that. We kind of work that back to, okay, what are we doing today, and what are we doing now, and what are we doing? Where is everything sitting right now? And coming up with our plan on day one, and then where is the money going on day two and month two and year two, and helping kind of put that plan into actually action. Mm-hmm. So it's really so the investment piece is really, there's kind of two parts around it. Again, there's an education element in terms of really kind of helping people understand what markets do and how they work. And yes, they're volatile. Yes, they jump around, but ultimately there is no other place to go as far as actually for real wealth creation. And then the second part of it is, okay, how can we use that knowledge to create the best plan for the individual to make sure that we go and all those goals and plans we talked about before, how we achieve that?
One of the interesting things to pick up on there around knowledge is you don't have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of every company in the world there's ways of having the right knowledge. I know it sounds slightly nefarious, but understanding things like risk is very important, I think. And we spend a lot of time with clients because risk can be mitigated. You can take steps to protect against the bad outcomes of risk. So the risk reward trade-off, people often understand that, without risk there isn't return. And so what you've described there with the different allocations, different pots, feels like we talk about risk calibrating, but just understanding, you don't have to even understand everything that's going on in the investment itself.
No,
but just understand what the real risks of that are. And I think that's one of the areas advisors do help a lot with clients, is because
and it's
a straightforward exercise.
Absolutely. And so there's the risk side, excuse me, and there's also and this is talked about a lot within our planner community, and probably less so amongst it's getting a lot better, but the idea of just index funds, and you don't need the superstar hedge fund managers or the superstar fund managers, Mr. Woodford, who invariably have horrible records. It works really well, and then it doesn't, and then when it doesn't, They take their own careers and then the finances of everyone who's invested with them down with them. Whereas index funds, you just remove it's removing risk from that, and so you're getting market-based performance for a much lower cost, and also significantly reduce the catastrophe risk along the way. And so back to back to your point, yes. So understanding and calibrating the risk of that investment, and that comes down to the diversification angle. It's also the diversification angle, and the risk element is also takes in what we talked about before, which is the emotional context of money, because you have people who are very nervous about money. They're very nervous about losing money, and that's fine because that's their upbringing and that's their makeup, and that's absolutely fine. With the idea, as long as they've got the understanding that you can go with a safe, in inverted commas, which is, I use inverted commas because safe is a word that's thrown around far too much. You can go with effectively a lower risk, lower growth portfolio. Okay, that's fine. As long as you've got the understanding that lower risk in the long term does mean lower growth. And if you're comfortable with that and happy with that, great. That's absolutely fine. And it's just having that understanding that there is, like in everything, there is a trade-off there. And it's just understanding how the trade-offs, and it's, like the example we've seen, I guess, in that sense is government bonds in the last 2 years. And this is not only, the fact that I sort of slightly laugh at this in a way, but it's not actually that funny, but even complex, investment consultants working within pension funds have found out that government bonds were not risk-free over the past few years. And there was a couple of pension funds got into some serious difficulty because their risk-free government bonds proved to be not so risk-free, and got themselves in a lot of trouble about it. So look, it's not
Got a whole government in trouble, really.
The what? Sorry.
Got a whole government in trouble.
Got a whole government, exactly. But it's not the concept of, because that shows actually how complex the understanding of risk in investment markets is, and how people shouldn't feel necessarily afraid of it, because yes, it exists there, but it also then shouldn't feel bad, because even at the top end of investment markets, there is a bit of a lack of understanding at some points in terms of what risks are there. And you go back, financial and history of governments and financial markets is littered with people misunderstanding the risks. Yes. And I think that actually, here you go, the classic example is long-term capital management, LTCM, which is known well within the financial circles, but again, normal people don't probably know this and should never need to know this. But LTCM was a hedge fund in around through the 90s, which was literally full of Nobel Prize winners in economics. They were set up, I think both of them got awarded Nobel Prizes in economics.
Myron Scholes and Robert Merton were both at LTCM, and they both won Nobel Prize, yes.
Yeah. And so, you can't get much smarter than these guys. And so, but the fund blew up, and it nearly took down the US government with it in 1998. And what made it blow up? Russia defaulted on its bonds, which you're like, but they had a very small position in Russian bonds, but it caused a cataclysmic chain of events that statistically weren't meant to happen. But guess what? They did. And so what they did not, individually, they understood all the risks in infinite detail and won Nobel Prizes about it. But what they didn't fail to understand, and they failed to foresee, and frankly, not any of us could have foreseen, was the impact risk about historical risks that weren't linked became linked, and therefore, frankly, took the company out. So risk is a really complex structure. We try and be as simple as we can with helping clients understand what risks they're facing, but also at the same time, having an open mind to say, okay, there will be those black swan events. There are things out there that will happen over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years that no one can't foresee. And so we just deal with them when they come, but not everything can be planned for.
There's always, the list of unplanned for disasters, you only have to go back, any 100-year chart of stock prices has 2 world wars, COVID, 2008, 84, tech boom 2000, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on. There's plenty of examples of things. LTCM usually makes the list, actually. So the unknowns that are known.
Unknown Donald Rumsfeld is unknown. Donald Rumsfeld.
Unknown unknowns, but we know that there's unknown unknowns out there. So wrap your head around that. Okay, so a couple of things just to bring us back to the book, and the things that getting away from sort of high finance a little bit back down to there's two topics in the sort of going further section of the book. One is about debt. Is debt a bad thing? And this is an area where people in their everyday lives take on risk. And some of them have found out quite a stiff lesson about that with interest rates pinging up recently. So talk a little bit about debt and whether it is a good or a bad thing.
Sure. So debt inherently is not a bad thing if you can pay it back. Simple. It becomes a tool. There's look at any company balance sheet out there. Most companies, especially larger companies, have debt on their balance sheets. So they have a combination of debt and equity. So, the idea of using debt to facilitate transactions, and especially transactions buying an asset that will over time appreciate in value, and the obvious one for that is a house, makes a lot of sense. But you've just got to be able to afford that debt. You've got to be able to afford the interest payments and the repayments in general. And if something happens where the idea if you cannot make those repayments, you need to effectively have an understanding that there may be other actions required. And so I have this conversation with clients sometimes, and they come in and say, well, we're thinking about buying the big house, but we're going to take on a truckload of debt, what feels like a lot of debt to do so. And we can say, yeah, sure, we can do that. But as long as you keep your job, that's absolutely fine. But I just would like you to think as if you don't have if you lost your job, what would be the consequences and what would be the implication? What would you do? And so it's not, it's a tough exercise because we all want to think the best for long term, but ultimately having having an understanding and having pre-thought through that as an exercise then really kind of allows you to go, okay, well, if we do that, if I do lose my job, then we would, borrow some money from mum and dad, or we would sell the house, or we would something. So just going through that's, I think for anyone taking on debt, they're the two most important things. Have the ability to pay the interest back. And if you can't, what decisions would you make at the time, and having pre-thought that. So but that's debt for a positive appreciating asset. Debt for a negatively or for a depreciating asset, i.e. a car, not a great strategy, because you've got a fixed, because you can't sell the
consumption, which depreciates instantly, by definition.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not gonna. So that I don't necessarily like debt for those sort of assets. And there's not many other assets, frankly, that I can think of where debt makes sense apart from a house. And actually, the one area that debt really doesn't make sense is credit card debt. And that's, again, it goes back to that Warren Buffett quote of what's the best investment you can make over time. Very simple, pay off your credit card debt. It's 19%. And that, I think that's the lowest you can get out there at the moment, is 19, 20%. There are some cards which you pay 45% on credit card debt. And people carry it because, well, the banks give it to them, or whoever. So that, whoever, not banks, or whichever providers, Amex or whoever, give them the credit, because of course it's very profitable for those companies to have you roll over your 45% debt. And it's terrible. It's a terrible investment. And so think about, I think of it the way with extinguishing debt is, how would you feel if someone offered you a guaranteed return of 45% on an investment? You think that's amazing. I'm like, well, that's the return you get if you pay off your credit card debt.
Yeah. Or alternatively, that's why, you're offering that to someone else. Why are you offering them 45% return? Yes.
So so I think I think the debt thing is, yes, debt is fine. Debt is, as long as it's been thought through and as long as it's used in the right way.
Yeah, very good. I was talking to on my previous attempt at hosting one of these podcasts with Caspar Harvey-Walls, and he was talking about real estate in London and with interest rates moving around, how the fact that lending requirements and particularly stress testing, which is the link here, had actually been a positive feature of the current lending cycle. So even though people are struggling in many cases, they have been stress tested by banks, which we all thought was a stupid idea at the time. Why do I need to worry about trying to pay this back at 6% when it's 1% now? But actually, this was the financial institutions
Now,
doing
6%, yeah.
financial planning. Well, 6% is now the reality, but they did stress test, and so it is that forward thinking that you talked about.
Yep.
What happens if the rates rise? What happens if you lose your job? What happens? What if? Most risks, if they're thought about carefully up front and taken on with a good, clear understanding, can be managed and often have very positive outcomes. It's when you get into things you don't understand that can be an issue. The last topic I want to just from the book, before we perhaps finish off with a few top tips, I just want to ask, there's one area that I'm a bit keen on as a father of a 9-year-old, and I know you've got the lovely 3 children as well, investing for children. So what can Hugo, Anya and Seth look forward to that you're setting aside for them, or you're in fact advising clients to set aside?
Well, is what becomes the answer then is actually what structures first, and then there's the underlying then is actually what you're invested in. So, I mean, in the UK, we're really lucky in terms of we have these great structures for everybody called ISAs. ISAs are fantastic. Most people know what ISAs are. You know, you can put in for an adult up to 20,000 per year, and any money you put in, that money is any growth, any income, any dividends, anything is tax free from then onwards, forever. That's fantastic. They're fantastic. For children, there are these things called junior ISAs. Again, most people with children have heard of junior ISAs. So junior ISAs, I think it's this year is £9,000 you can put in each year. That's the limit. And again, for those children, you can, anything you put in there, those junior ISAs, you can't, once the money goes in, you can't touch the money. And once the money goes in, but when the child turns 18, that junior ISA will roll into a normal ISA and it will become their money to do with as they wish. So, you know, tax-free growth that can compound over 18 years, that's a pretty attractive. And so certainly junior ISAs are definitely the most useful. Now, lots of people go, oh, I don't want my child getting access. Sorry, not lots of people. A common
pushback
hesitation is, oh, I don't want my child getting access to all this money when they're 18 years old. I flip it around a little bit and say, well, actually, the child, if you help the child understand what this money is and that they have it in the many years before then, they'll have a greater comfort level with it, and it uses as an education piece for them to say, look, this is your junior ISA, you know, as a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old. Oh, look, it's gone down this year. Oh, it's gone up this year. Oh, why has it gone up? Why has it gone down? Oh, markets go up, markets go down. It's a conversation about money. It's a conversation about risk. It's a conversation about investing. It's a conversation starter that is actually going to be really valuable for that child, for their, you know, livelihood. So I think that's where junior ISAs are really valuable. For that, I know the one you like also is junior SIPs. And these are fascinating things where you get the money goes into the
day one from the government,
and you get 20% day one from the government, and then it's got 55 years of compounding potentially. You know, no one can touch a SIP till they're 55, so you've got this enormous amount of compounding value that can start very early. And these are, you know, really long dated. So, I mean, I would love to think that I'm going to be alive when my children are 55, but I'm pretty sure I won't be. So these are kind of the ultimate in kind of long-term planning options. And so I think, look, junior ISAs definitely, junior SIPs definitely. The one that I don't like are premium bonds, but because they are tend to be quite popular. But the idea of premium bonds as savings vehicles are just, they don't work because they don't compound. Like premium bonds, you buy £15 worth of premium bonds now, in 50 years time, they'll still be £15 worth of premium bonds. And yes, you would have got some prizes in inverted commas along the way, but the rates you get aren't great. And the prizes are, I've never heard of anyone winning this £1,000,000.
It's a
Perhaps someone does.
psychology thing as well, isn't it? It's effectively promoting gambling rather than promoting investing.
Well, and it's,
I
yeah,
know traders like yourself, there's a bit of a fine line between those things, but it is a different mentality, isn't it?
yeah, but it
There
doesn't.
are better
You're
options these
losing
days.
money every year against inflation. Every year you're losing money on that value against inflation. Whereas, in some sort of equity-based investment, yes, you're going to have your ups and downs over the time, but history of equity markets, the S&P 500 has gone up by, I think it's 9.5% on average for the last 150 years. Even the old FTSE's gone up something like 8.5% on average. Yeah, that doesn't mean it's going to be. I mean, for some years like last year, it can't be down 15%. Yeah, of course it can, but it can also be up 30%. And over that long-term period, it does. The benefits have been, or the history has shown that actually the compounding value is much, much greater in equities than in any other type of investment vehicle, be it bonds, be it property, and especially cash.
Um, talking about 8 and 9% is sometimes a bit tricky for people to intuitively get their head around. So I often like using it. There's a rule of thumb: 7% compound, it doubles every 10 years.
Yeah.
So, as you just said, the markets can, whether you believe whether it's 8 for the UK or 9 for the US, to get the market return 7%, your money's going to double in value every 10 years, mathematically. And yeah, it's a bit of an up and down, but so that's just a simple way of getting your head around it. Now, 55, as you've just said, that's 5 doubling times on the money. So yeah. Felix got a little bit in there just because I like the idea of I just want to. I won't be around. I'm 53. There's no way I'll be around to see it in 50 years' time. But hopefully, you might drop the odd bit of flowers on my gravestone or something, rather than never turning up and saying hi.
Sorry, you can call the dog Adrian or something like that.
Yeah, we'll call it, yes, something like that. So we've had a long chat, as we often do when we have these conversations, and gone into planning and saving, investing, and talked a bit about the psychology of money. And the title of the book, Plan for Happy, really is, I guess, trying to unravel a bit more of that psychology of money side of things rather than all the technical stuff we've sort of touched on there. Two questions remaining. The first one is 3 tips that if someone's okay, there's an implied first tip, which is buy the book, clearly. But other than that, what would your 3 tips be to let's say 30-year-old Adam, about what he should do, given that's we've broadly positioned the book, the readers the book should be. What's the 3 tips for 30-year-old Adam?
So, very first tip, probably the most important tip: have a look at your pension. Just understand what's it invested in, and 90% of all pensions are still invested in the default fund that effectively, which is a one-size-fits-all fund that the pension provider put you in. And now pension providers do not know you. They don't know what you like. They don't know what you're saving for. They don't know anything about you. They just stick you in a fund. And most people just totally ignore it and just leave it there. So look at your pension. If you're 30, there needs to probably be a pretty good reason why you wouldn't switch that pension to 100% equities in an index tracking fund. I don't see, for a pension, I don't like. For other investments, yes, okay, if your risk level, you don't like taking on investment risk, all of that stuff, that's fine, I get. But for a pension, if you're 30, you can't even touch this money for 25 years. The idea of the ups.
This is a tip. This is not financial advice, obviously.
This is a tip. No, nothing in this is ever financial advice, as the disclaimer on the front says.
Yeah.
The idea of, that's why I said you would have to be a very good reason not to do this. So that's why it comes into the tip. So first point, look at your pension. Is it 100% equity tracker funds? Then if not, why not? Now, look, if you're 45, that's a different story. If you're especially if you're 50, 55, it's a totally different story. So there's context there in terms of your age. So that's the first one. The second one would be, it actually involves your pension as well, but in terms of whatever role, if your employer offers you the opportunity to match or offer contributions, if you increase your contributions, the employer will also then increase their contributions. Go up to the level that you're maximizing your employer contributions, as far as your pension contribution, because that is effectively free money from your employer. You're getting a pay rise from your employer without actually getting a pay rise. And in fact, it's even tax-free. So it's even better. So again, a lot of people just totally forget about that or don't do that or disregard that. And for the sake of an extra like 2% of your salary or 3% of your salary, which over the year, is effectively, should be relatively minor, you can,
Particularly if half of it's going in tax. So yeah,
especially half it's going in tax, and then you can get some extra contributions coming in from your employer. So you're giving you're giving your long-term self a pay rise, from a small contribution from your short-term self. So they're the first two. Look at the pension fund, what you're invested in, and then also maximize the pension fund. And the final one, I'm actually going to be really basic here, and especially if you've got children or even a significant other, is get a will done properly and just get yourself some life cover, get yourself some protection, because again, this is not about you. This is about the people you're leaving behind. And so it's just it's some life cover is so simple. Just put it in place. And once it's done, it's done. And the will is exactly the same. A will is not for you, because guess what? You're dead. You don't get to deal with a will. But if you don't have a will in place, everyone else has to deal with that. And I've seen situations where that's happened, and it's horrible. And so again, get the will in place, get some basic protection in place, and it's not about you, it's about others. It's about the people who are closest to you. So there you go. They're the top three. Look at your pension fund, max your contributions, and put a will and basic life cover in place.
Okay. So my final question today, as we've mentioned numerous times, as you expect on a podcast about a book, the Plan for Happy. What is, we've gone back to young Adam, 30 years old. What does a happy Adam at 55, let's say 60, because you're 46 now. What does a happy Adam at 60 look like?
Whoa, I wasn't expecting this question. Right, what am I doing? What age am I?
You wrote the book on it, mate. You've got to get the question.
What age am I? 60? 60? It doesn't matter, actually.
Doesn't matter.
Because I'll be doing the same thing. I am. What am I doing? I have children out from under my feet, which is nice. They're off doing what they want to be doing. That's fine. I am working. I am working somewhere between 3 and 5 days a week. Don't know. Depends how old I am. I'm still cycling. I'm spending time in a house in France that I have not bought yet. That is on the plan. I'm going skiing in winter. I'm going to Australia often. I mean to say often, maybe once a year. That's probably enough. But I'm being productive, and I am, definitely still working. Definitely working, and probably working to a point where people are saying maybe you don't need to work so hard, but I'm going to want to. I just look at Rupert Murdoch, you look at David Attenborough, you look at Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, God rest his soul. These people are in their 90s and still working hard and still very switched on. And my view is they're very switched on because they're using their muscles, and the biggest muscle at all is the brain, and they're using it. And so that's what I want to do. So yeah.
Right. Fair enough. So
bit of cycling.
Cycling, yes.
Lots of eating outside with rosé and seafood.
Right. Lovely.
And there we go.
Excellent. So Plan for Happy, where do we get our copy?
Amazon.
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah, so there's a link on Amazon available. It is all available, also available through Barnes and Noble in the US, but there's no reason for anyone else to do that. There will be in the show notes, I'm sure we'll put a link through. It's also on the website as well. There, I'm hoping come the new year today, where are we? We're in December now. So come the new year, we might be doing a more formal book launch. But let's see on that. And yeah, look, I hope everyone enjoys it. And yeah, if you've got any questions, either come through the website, or even I've got a personal author website, which is adamwalkom.com. Connect with me on there, sign up to a regular newsletter we're sending out through there. And yeah, look, I hope people find it valuable.
All right, wonderful. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Adam.
Thank you very much. And thanks for interviewing me.